November 12, 1944. The radio crackled with static, then silence, then a voice in broken English begging for help before cutting to German code. Sergeant William Crane heard it first, his hand freezing on the dial as the coordinates repeated 3 times, then nothing. His squad thought it was interference, enemy propaganda, maybe even a trap. But when the fog lifted at dawn and they saw the cargo ship drifting 2 miles off the Georgia coast, no lights, no movement, no flag, Crane made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered his men to board. What they found in that ship's belly wasn't just death, it was something the United States Army would spend decades trying to bury. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The patrol boat cut through the November swells like a knife through cold butter. Sergeant William Crane stood at the bow, one hand gripping the rail, the other pressed against the binoculars hanging from his neck. Behind him, 5 men in wool coats and steel helmets sat in silence, rifles cradled across their laps. The engine's hum was steady, rhythmic, the only sound aside from the slap of water against the hull. They had been running harbor patrol for 8 months now, up and down the coast between Savannah and Brunswick, checking fishing boats, escorting supply barges, watching for German U-boats that never came. It was cold work, boring work, the kind of duty that made a man feel useless while the real war raged across the ocean. Crane lowered the binoculars and rubbed his eyes. The ship ahead was barely visible through the morning mist, a dark silhouette against the pale grey sky. No smoke from the stack, no crew on deck, no flag. It sat low in the water, listing slightly to starboard, drifting with the current like a corpse. Behind him, Corporal Eddie Mays shifted his weight and cleared his throat. "Sarge, that thing's been floating for hours. Nobody answers the horn. Nobody waves. You really think we should get closer?" Crane didn't turn around. "Orders are orders. We check every vessel in these waters." Mays fell silent. The other men exchanged glances, but said nothing. They knew better than to argue with Crane. He was 32 years old, a decade older than most of them, with a face carved from stone and eyes that didn't blink much. He had served in the Civilian Conservation Corps before the war, building roads through Georgia swamps, and he carried that same quiet, relentless discipline into the Army. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Private Leroy Jackson, the youngest of the group at 19, leaned forward and squinted at the ship. "You think it's abandoned, Sarge?" "Could be. Could be engine trouble. Could be they're all drunk below deck. Or dead," someone muttered. Crane turned his head slightly. "Who said that?" No one answered. The patrol boat closed the distance slowly. 50 yards. 30. The ship loomed larger now, its hull streaked with rust and barnacles, the name barely visible on the bow beneath layers of salt and grime. Crane read it aloud. SS Monterey Bell, registered out of Galveston. Private Thomas Reed, the squad's radio man, pulled a soggy notebook from his coat pocket and flipped through the pages. "I got nothing on a Monterey Bell in the coastal registry. No scheduled routes through Georgia waters." Crane frowned. "Then what the hell is it doing here?" The boat's pilot, a white Navy ensign named Callahan, throttled down and let the patrol boat drift alongside. He leaned out of the cabin, his face pale and nervous. "Sergeant, I don't like this. Protocol says we're supposed to call it in and wait for the Coast Guard." Crane met his eyes. "You heard the same transmission I did, Ensign. If that was a distress call, we're already late." Callahan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Everyone on the boat had heard the radio transmission 2 hours before dawn. The broken English, the desperate tone, then the switch to German, clear and mechanical, repeating coordinates over and over until the signal died. Crane had written down every word, every number, even though he didn't speak German. He knew what it meant. Someone on that ship had been trying to reach someone else, and they hadn't finished. The patrol boat bumped gently against the Monterey Bell's hull. Crane grabbed the rope ladder hanging from the ship's deck rail, tested it with his weight, then looked back at his men. "Mays, Jackson, Reed, you're with me. The rest of you stay on the boat, and keep your rifles ready. If anything moves up there, you shoot first and ask questions later." The men nodded, their faces tense. Crane started climbing. The rope was slick with seawater and rot, the knots frayed in places, but it held. He pulled himself over the rail and dropped onto the deck. The silence hit him first. No gulls, no wind, just the faint creak of wood and metal settling. The deck was empty. Coils of rope lay abandoned near the mast. A tin cup sat upright on a crate, half filled with rainwater. Everything looked normal, too normal. Mays climbed up next, followed by Jackson and Reed. They spread out instinctively, rifles raised, eyes scanning. Crane moved toward the wheelhouse, his boots silent on the wet planks. The door hung open, swinging slightly with the ship's motion. He stepped inside. The smell hit him like a fist. Sweet, rotten, chemical. He covered his nose with his sleeve and forced himself forward. The wheel was locked in place, the compass cracked, the radio console dark. Papers were scattered across the navigation table, charts marked with pencil lines, a half-written log entry dated November 10th. 2 days ago. Crane picked up the logbook and read the last line. Weather clear, speed steady, estimated arrival. Savannah 600, November 12th. All crew accounted for. He set the book down and turned to Mays. "Where the hell is everybody?" Mays shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, Sarge, but something's wrong. Real wrong." They moved through the ship methodically, checking every compartment. The galley was untouched, pots still on the stove, bread moulding in a basket. The crew quarters were empty, bunks made, personal belongings neatly stored. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. It was as if the entire crew had simply vanished. Then Jackson called out from below deck, "Sarge, you need to see this." Crane descended the narrow stairway into the cargo hold. The air was colder here, damp and heavy. The smell was worse. Jackson stood at the far end, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Wooden crates were stacked floor to ceiling, each one stamped with military markings. U.S. Army Medical Corps. Fragile. Refrigerate immediately. Crane approached slowly. Medical supplies. Jackson nodded. Looks like it. But Sarge, check this out. He pointed his light at one of the crates. The lid was pried open, nails bent back, wood splintered. Inside, glass vials lay shattered, their contents dried into sticky brown stains. The label on one intact vial read, "Experimental Serum Batch 7. Authorized personnel only." Crane felt his chest tighten. This isn't supposed to be here. Reed appeared at the bottom of the stairs, breathing hard. "Sarge, I found something. Captain's quarters, locked from the inside." They moved quickly, climbing back up and crossing the deck to the officer's cabin. The door was solid oak, the lock intact. Crane tried the handle. It didn't budge. He stepped back and kicked just below the lock, once, twice. On the third kick, the wood splintered and the door swung open. The captain sat slumped in his chair, head tilted back, eyes open and glassy. His uniform was clean, his hands folded in his lap. On the desk in front of him lay a leather-bound journal, a fountain pen and a service revolver. Crane picked up the journal and opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. November 11th, 1944. I don't know who will read this. Maybe no one. We were transporting experimental medicine, classified cargo bound for field hospitals in Europe. The orders came from high up. No questions, no inspections. But 2 days out, the crew started getting sick. Fever, vomiting, bleeding from the nose and mouth. I sealed the cargo hold, but it didn't matter. Whatever's in those crates, it's not medicine, it's poison. I tried to radio for help, but someone jammed the signal. I heard voices speaking German. I think we were set up. I think someone wanted this cargo to reach American hospitals. God forgive me, I can't let that happen. I'm scuttling the ship. If you find this, burn it. Burn everything. Don't let it reach land. Crane closed the journal, his hands trembling. He looked at the captain's body, then at the revolver, then at his men standing in the doorway. Mays spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarge, what do we do?" Crane stared at the journal, his mind racing. If they reported this, they'd be questioned, blamed. An all-black squad finding a ship full of poison meant for American troops. No one would believe them. They'd be accused of sabotage, of treason. But if they stayed silent, if they let the ship sink, the cargo would disappear. The truth would disappear, and whoever did this would try again. He looked up, his face hard. We search the rest of the ship, every inch. If there's proof of sabotage, we find it. Then we decide what to do. But even as he said it, Crane knew the decision was already made. They had crossed a line the moment they boarded, and there was no going back. Outside, the fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the patrol boat below. The Monterey Belle drifted silently, carrying its secrets deeper into the cold Atlantic morning. Crane ordered the men to split up. Mays and Jackson would search the upper decks, checking crew quarters and the galley again for anything they might have missed. Reed would stay with him in the cargo hold. They needed to understand what they were dealing with before making any decisions. The captain's journal had given them a story, but stories meant nothing without proof, and proof in the hands of 6 black soldiers accused of finding poison on a military supply ship would need to be ironclad. Reed descended the ladder carefully, his boots scraping against the metal rungs. His flashlight beam swept across the stacked crates, catching dust particles suspended in the cold air. The smell was worse now, thick and cloying, like rotting fruit mixed with disinfectant. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and tied it around his nose and mouth. "Doesn't help much," he muttered. Crane moved between the crates, reading the stamps and labels. Every box bore the same markings. U.S. Army Medical Corps, Fort Detrick, Maryland. Experimental serum batch 7 through 14. Ship date November 8, 1944. Destination classified. He ran his hand along the wood, feeling the rough grain, the military precision of the stenciling. This wasn't black market cargo, this was official, authorized, which made it infinitely more dangerous. He stopped at the crate Jackson had found earlier, the one with the broken lid. The glass vials inside were shattered, their contents dried into dark crusts on the wood. He knelt down and picked up a shard of glass, holding it up to his flashlight. The liquid had been thick, viscous, almost gel-like before it dried. Not like any medicine he'd ever seen. He set the glass down carefully and pulled out the captain's journal again, flipping to an earlier entry. November 9th, 1944. Cargo loaded under armed supervision. No crew allowed near the hold during transfer. Medical officer on dock said the serum was critical for treating battlefield infections, some new penicillin derivative. Said it had to stay refrigerated or it would spoil. But there's no refrigeration unit down here, just ice packed around the crates. I asked the officer about it. He told me to follow orders and keep my mouth shut. Crane closed the journal and looked at Reed. No refrigeration. In November. Off the Georgia coast. Reed shook his head slowly. That doesn't make sense, Sarge. If this stuff needed to stay cold, they would have put it on a refrigerated transport, not a standard cargo hauler. Exactly. Which means either somebody made a mistake or this cargo was never meant to arrive intact. They moved deeper into the hold, past rows of crates until they reached the far wall. There, tucked behind a stack of smaller boxes, Crane spotted something that made his pulse quicken. A metal toolbox, lid open, tools scattered on the floor, a crowbar, a hammer, wood shavings, and next to it, a canvas bag with German markings. He picked up the bag carefully, his hands steady despite the adrenaline rushing through his veins. Inside were papers, documents, maps. He spread them out on top of a crate, using his flashlight to illuminate the text. Everything was in German, typewritten, official-looking. He couldn't read the language, but he recognized certain words. Krankenhaus, hospital, Amerikanisch, American. And at the bottom of one document, a signature followed by a stamp. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, German High Command. Reed leaned in, his eyes wide. Sarge, is that what I think it is? Crane nodded grimly. Sabotage orders. Someone on this ship was working for the Germans. They weren't just transporting poison. They were delivering it, but why? Reed's voice cracked slightly. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just sink the ship? Because if the cargo reaches American hospitals and soldiers start dying, it looks like our own medicine killed them. It creates chaos, distrust, makes people question whether their own government is experimenting on them. Crane folded the documents and slipped them into his coat pocket. It's psychological warfare, and it's brilliant. They continued searching. In a corner near the engine room access, Crane found a logbook hidden beneath a tarp. It wasn't the official ship's log. This one was personal, handwritten in English, with entries that stopped on November 10th. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, nothing like the captain's shaky scrawl. October 15th, 1944. Made contact with the asset in Baltimore. Cargo will be loaded in Galveston under the cover of standard medical supplies. My role is simple. Ensure the crates are opened during transport. Ensure the crew is exposed. Ensure the ship drifts into American waters where it will be found. The Americans will investigate. They will find poison. They will panic. The seed of doubt will be planted. Long live the Reich. Crane's jaw clenched. He flipped through the pages, reading entry after entry. The saboteur had been meticulous. He had documented everything. The bribes paid to dock workers, the fake credentials used to board the ship, the careful timing of when to break open the crates. And then on November 10th, the final entry. November 10th, 1944. The crew is sick, faster than expected. The captain suspects something. He's locked himself in his quarters. I heard him on the radio trying to send a distress call, but I jammed the signal. I transmitted the coordinates in German as planned, so our U-boats know where to find the wreckage. But something went wrong. I'm feeling it too. Fever, headache, blood in my mouth. I opened the crates too soon. I was supposed to wait until we were closer to port. I miscalculated. I'm writing this because I need someone to know. We were betrayed, not by the Americans, by our own command. This poison wasn't meant to kill soldiers. It was meant to kill us. The expendable ones, the ones who knew too much. I hope whoever finds this understands. We were all pawns. The entry ended there. No signature, no name. Just a confession written by a dying man who realized too late that he had been used. Crane closed the logbook and stood in silence for a long moment. Reed watched him, waiting. Finally, the sergeant spoke, his voice low and controlled. Whoever wrote this is probably dead somewhere on this ship. We need to find the body. They searched for another hour. The ship was a maze of narrow corridors and cramped compartments, each one darker and colder than the last. They found more evidence of the crew's final hours, vomit stains on the floor, bloody handprints on the walls, a sailor's cap floating in a puddle of oily water, but no bodies, not in the galley, not in the engine room, not in the crew quarters. Then Mays called down from the upper deck. "Sarge, you need to come up here. Now." Crane and Reed climbed quickly, emerging into the grey morning light. The fog had thickened, wrapping the ship in a ghostly shroud. Mays and Jackson stood near the stern, staring over the rail. Crane joined them and looked down. The bodies were in the water, 7 of them, floating face down, arms outstretched, bobbing gently with the waves. They were wearing the ship's crew uniforms, dark wool coats soaked through, life vests inflated but useless. They hadn't drowned. They had died before hitting the water, their faces frozen in expressions of pain and terror. Crane could see it even from the deck, the blood crusted around their noses and mouths, the discoloration of their skin, the same symptoms the captain had described in his journal. Mays turned to Crane, his face pale. They tried to abandon ship, tried to get away from whatever was killing them. But it didn't matter, Jackson added quietly. The poison was already in them. Crane stared at the bodies, his mind working through the implications. 7 crew members. The captain made 8. That left 1 unaccounted for. The saboteur. He turned to Reed. Check the manifest. How many crew was this ship supposed to have? Reed pulled out the soggy notebook again, flipping to the page where he'd copied the information from the wheelhouse. 9 total. Captain, first mate, engineer, cook, and 5 deckhands. 9, Crane repeated. We've got 8 bodies accounted for. 1's still missing. They searched the ship again, this time more urgently. The fog grew thicker, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. The patrol boat below was barely visible, Ensign Callahan's voice drifting up through the mist, asking if everything was all right. Crane ignored him. They found the 9th body in the engine room, wedged between 2 steam pipes. It was a man in his 30s, thin and pale, dressed in a deckhand's uniform but wearing civilian shoes. His pockets were empty except for a small leather wallet, containing no identification, just a single photograph of a woman and child standing in front of a house in what looked like a German village. On the back, written in faded ink, was a single word: Heimat, home. "This is him," Crane said quietly. "The saboteur." Reed knelt beside the body, checking for any other clues. There was a piece of paper clutched in the man's hand, crumpled and damp. He pried it loose carefully and smoothed it out. It was a telegram dated October 20th, 1944, sent from New York. The message was in English: "Mission approved. Proceed as instructed. Eliminate all witnesses. No survivors." It was unsigned. Crane took the telegram and read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket with the other documents. "We've got enough: German sabotage orders, the captain's journal, the personal logbook, the telegram. This is proof." "But proof of what?" Mays asked, his voice tight. "That the Germans tried to poison our medical supplies, that they succeeded, that 9 men are dead because of it. Sarge, who's going to believe us? We're harbor patrol. We're not investigators. We're not even supposed to be on this ship." Crane met his eyes. "That's exactly why we have to report it. If we don't, this cargo disappears. The bodies disappear. And whoever planned this tries again. Next time it might work. Next time soldiers in field hospitals might die because they trusted their medicine." "And what if they blame us?" Jackson said suddenly. His voice was louder now, edged with frustration. "What if command decides it's easier to say 6 black soldiers sabotaged the ship than to admit the Germans infiltrated our supply lines? You know how this works, Sarge. We're not heroes. We're convenient." The words hung in the air. No one spoke. Because everyone knew Jackson was right. They had all lived long enough to understand how blame worked, how investigations turned, how easy it was to bury the truth under the right kind of story. Crane looked at each of them in turn. Mays, Jackson, Reed, good men, loyal men, men who had trusted him to keep them alive. He pulled the documents from his pocket and held them up. "This is evidence, real evidence. If we hide it, we're no better than the people who planned this. If we report it, we take the risk. But at least we give the truth a chance." Reed spoke quietly. "And if they don't believe us, then we make them believe us," Crane said. "We photograph everything. We take the captain's journal, the logbook, the German documents, the telegram. We bring it all back. We testify. And we don't back down, no matter what they throw at us." The men exchanged glances. Finally, Mays nodded. "All right, Sarge. We do this your way." Crane allowed himself a brief moment of relief. Then he turned to Reed. "Use the camera from the patrol boat. Document everything, every crate, every label, every body. I want photographic evidence they can't deny. Jackson, you help him. Mays, you're with me. We're bringing the captain's body and the saboteur back to the boat. Command's going to want to see them." They worked quickly, racing against the thickening fog and the rising tide. Reed took photographs methodically, his hands steady despite the cold. Jackson helped him move crates, arrange evidence, make sure every shot was clear. Crane and Mays wrapped the captain's body in a tarp, then did the same for the saboteur. It was grim work, lifting dead men, carrying them across the deck, lowering them carefully into the patrol boat where Ensign Callahan waited with wide, horrified eyes. By the time they finished, it was nearly noon. The fog showed no signs of clearing. Crane took one last look at the Monterey Belle, at the ship that had become a floating tomb. Part of him wanted to burn it, to send it to the bottom of the ocean and let the sea bury its secrets. But that would destroy the evidence, and without evidence, they had nothing. He climbed down into the patrol boat, his boots hitting the deck with a heavy thud. The men followed, silent and exhausted. Ensign Callahan started the engine without a word, his face pale, his hands shaking on the controls. The boat pulled away from the Monterey Belle, cutting through the fog toward shore. Crane sat in the stern, the documents pressed against his chest inside his coat. He didn't know what would happen when they reached port. He didn't know if command would believe them, or thank them, or arrest them. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had done the right thing, and sometimes that had to be enough. Behind them, the Monterey Belle drifted silently into the fog. A ghost ship carrying the weight of 9 dead men, and a secret that would change everything. The patrol boat cut through the fog for nearly 2 hours before the Georgia coastline emerged like a dark smudge against the grey sky. Brunswick Naval Station appeared gradually, its piers and warehouses solidifying out of the mist, guard towers rising above the waterline with searchlights already sweeping the harbour despite the midday hour. Ensign Callahan radioed ahead, his voice tight and professional as he reported their return. Patrol Boat 7 returning to dock. We have casualties aboard. Request immediate medical and command presence. The response came back almost instantly, sharp and clipped. Patrol Boat 7, maintain position at Dock 3. Do not disembark. Repeat, do not disembark. MPs are en route. Callahan glanced back at Crane, his face uncertain. MPs, Sergeant. That's not standard protocol for casualties. Crane said nothing. He sat in the stern with his arms crossed, the document still tucked inside his coat, watching the base grow larger. Behind him, Mays, Jackson, and Reed sat in silence, their rifles across their knees, their eyes fixed on the approaching shore. None of them spoke. They all understood what MPs meant, military police, which meant someone already suspected something was wrong. The boat nudged against the dock with a soft bump. Callahan cut the engine. Within seconds, 6 MPs appeared on the pier, their white helmets gleaming even in the dim light, their rifles held at the ready. A captain stepped forward, his uniform crisp and his expression unreadable. He looked down at the boat, his eyes sweeping over the tarped bodies, the exhausted soldiers, the German documents visible in Crane's lap. "Sergeant," the captain said, his voice cold and formal, "I'm Captain Reynolds, base security. You're ordered to remain in the boat until the investigating officer arrives. No one moves. No one speaks to anyone outside this detail. Is that understood?" Crane stood slowly, his movements deliberate. "Understood, sir. But with respect, we have evidence of enemy sabotage. A cargo ship was—" "I know what you found, Sergeant." Reynolds cut him off. "That's why you're staying put until someone with clearance gets here." He gestured to the MPs. "Keep them contained. No one on or off that boat." The MPs spread out along the dock, their rifles not pointed but ready. Crane sat back down, his jaw tight. Mays leaned in close and whispered, "This is bad, Sarge. They're treating us like suspects." Crane didn't answer, because Mays was right. They weren't being treated like soldiers who had discovered a threat. They were being treated like men who needed to be controlled, isolated, kept away from witnesses until someone decided what story to tell. 20 minutes passed, then an hour. The fog began to lift, revealing the full scope of the naval base. Warehouses lined the waterfront. Supply trucks moved between buildings. Sailors went about their duties, casting curious glances at the patrol boat surrounded by MPs. No one approached. No one asked questions. It was as if Crane and his men had become invisible. Finally, a staff car pulled up to the dock. A colonel stepped out, his uniform decorated with ribbons and insignia that marked him as someone important. He was followed by 2 men in civilian clothes, both carrying leather briefcases, both wearing expressions that gave nothing away. Intelligence, Crane thought. Or worse. The colonel walked to the edge of the dock and looked down at the boat. His eyes were cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen too much war to be shocked by anything. "Sergeant Crane," he said. His voice was quieter than Reynolds, but somehow more dangerous. "I'm Colonel Briggs, base commander. These men are with Army intelligence. You're going to tell us everything that happened out there. And I mean everything." Crane stood again. "Yes, sir. We intercepted a distress signal early this morning. A cargo ship, the SS Monterey Belle, was drifting off the coast. We boarded and found the crew dead. The cargo was poisoned. We recovered documents showing German sabotage. We have proof, sir. Evidence that—" Colonel Briggs raised his hand. "Stop. You'll give your full report inside, not out here." He turned to the MPs. "Bring them to Interrogation Room C separately. Start with the sergeant separately." The word landed like a hammer. Crane felt his chest tighten. Mays shot him a look, his eyes wide with barely concealed alarm. Separating them meant they couldn't coordinate their stories. It meant command wanted to find inconsistencies. It meant they were being interrogated, not debriefed. Crane climbed out of the boat, his boots hitting the dock with a heavy thud. 2 MPs moved in on either side of him, not touching him but close enough to make their presence clear. He glanced back at his men. Stay calm. Tell the truth. That's all we can do. But as the MPs led him away toward a grey concrete building at the edge of the base, Crane felt the weight of what was coming. The truth wasn't always enough, not when powerful people wanted a different story. The interrogation room was small and windowless, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. A metal table sat in the center, 2 chairs on one side, one on the other. Crane was directed to the single chair. He sat, his hands resting on the table, his back straight. The door closed behind him with a heavy click, then silence. He waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He knew what they were doing, letting him sit, letting him think, letting the isolation work on his nerves. It was a tactic as old as interrogation itself. But Crane had spent 2 years in the CCC working in places where the nearest person was miles away. Silence didn't bother him. Finally, the door opened. Colonel Briggs entered, followed by one of the men from Army Intelligence. The man was in his 40s, thin and sharp-featured, with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that gave away nothing. He set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a notepad and pen. Then he sat down and looked at Crane for a long moment without speaking. Briggs remained standing, his arms crossed. The intelligence officer spoke first, his voice smooth and measured. "Sergeant Crane, I'm Major Houseman, Army Intelligence. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly and completely. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Houseman clicked his pen. "Let's start with the radio transmission. You claim you heard a distress call this morning. What time exactly?" Crane recited the details from memory. 0342 hours. The transmission was in broken English at first. A man saying he needed help. Then it switched to German. Repeated coordinates. I wrote them down. He reached into his coat pocket for the notebook. Houseman held up a hand. "We'll get to that. First, tell me how you knew the coordinates were for a ship. Could have been anything, could have been a trap. The coordinates matched the position of the Monterey Bell. When we reached the area, we found the ship drifting exactly where the transmission indicated." "Convenient," Houseman said, his tone flat. Crane met his eyes. "Sir, we followed protocol. We investigated a distress signal. That's our duty." Houseman made a note. "And when you boarded, you found the crew dead, all of them?" "Yes, sir. 7 bodies in the water, 1 in the engine room, the captain in his quarters, 9 men dead, and none of you got sick." Crane hesitated. The question felt like a trap. "No, sir, we wore masks. We didn't touch the cargo. We documented everything and returned immediately." Houseman leaned back in his chair, studying Crane. "You said you found documents, German documents. How did you know where to look?" "We searched the ship, found a toolbox with German markings, found a logbook, found orders. A logbook, written in English." "Yes, sir, by a German saboteur." Crane's jaw tightened. That's what the logbook says. The man was working for German intelligence. He was supposed to expose the crew to the poison and let the ship drift into our waters. It was psychological warfare, sir. Make it look like our own medicine killed our men. Houseman wrote something down, his expression unchanged. "That's quite a theory, Sergeant. Very detailed, almost like you've thought it through." Crane felt the shift, the subtle accusation hiding beneath the words. "I'm reporting what I found, sir. The evidence speaks for itself." "Does it?" Houseman pulled a photograph from his briefcase. It was one of the pictures Reed had taken, showing the broken crate and the shattered vials. "This is your evidence. Broken glass and some stains. How do we know this wasn't already damaged before you boarded?" "The captain's journal confirms it. He writes about the crew getting sick, about sealing the cargo hold, about—" Briggs interrupted, his voice sharp. "We've read the journal, Sergeant. We've also read the logbook you claim belonged to a German agent, and I'll be honest with you, it all seems very convenient. Too convenient." Crane stared at him. "Sir, I don't understand." Briggs leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "Let me explain it to you. A cargo ship goes missing. An all-black patrol unit finds it. Everyone aboard is dead. The cargo is destroyed. And suddenly there's a journal and a logbook and German documents that perfectly explain why it's not your fault. Can you see how that looks? The words hit like a punch. Crane's hands tightened into fists on the table. Sir, are you accusing me of sabotage? I'm saying it's suspicious. Briggs straightened. You're Harbor Patrol, Sergeant. Your job is to check fishing boats and escort barges. Yet you board a military cargo ship without authorization, without waiting for the Coast Guard, and you just happen to find evidence of a German conspiracy. Evidence that conveniently clears you of any responsibility. We didn't sabotage that ship. Crane's voice was hard now, controlled but edged with anger. We found it. We investigated it. We reported it. That's our duty. Your duty was to call it in and wait for proper authority, Houseman said calmly. Instead, you took it upon yourselves to board a contaminated vessel, move evidence, and bring back documents that may or may not be authentic. Can you see how that raises questions? Crane forced himself to breathe slowly. The documents are real. The bodies are real. The poison is real. Test the cargo, test the bodies, you'll see. We will, Briggs said. But until then, you and your men are confined to base. No communication with anyone outside this investigation. Is that clear? Sir, with respect. Is that clear, Sergeant? Crane swallowed the words he wanted to say. Yes, sir. Good. Briggs nodded to the MPs standing by the door. Take him to the holding barracks. Keep him separated from the others until we finish questioning them. As the MPs escorted Crane out, he caught a glimpse of Mays being led into another room down the hall. Their eyes met for a brief second. Mays looked scared. Crane tried to project confidence, tried to tell him without words that everything would be all right, but he didn't believe it himself. The holding barracks were little more than a storage building converted into temporary detention. A single room with 6 cots, barred windows, and a guard posted outside. Crane sat on one of the cots and stared at the wall. Hours passed. No one came. No one spoke to him. The only sound was the distant hum of the bass, trucks and voices, and the rhythmic clang of work, continuing as if the world hadn't just tilted. Finally, as the sun set and shadows filled the room, the door opened. Mays, Jackson, and Reed were brought in, their faces drawn and exhausted. The guard closed the door and locked it. The men stood in silence for a moment, looking at each other. Then Mays spoke, his voice low and bitter. They think we did it, Sarge. They think we poisoned the crew and made up the German sabotage story to cover it up. Crane closed his eyes. I know. Reed sat down heavily on a cot. They kept asking me the same questions over and over, trying to trip me up, trying to make me say something different from what you said. They don't believe us. Jackson paced near the window, his hands clenched. This is what I was afraid of. We're the easy answer. 6 black soldiers, 1 dead ship. Blame us and the investigation ends. No one has to admit the Germans got inside our supply chain. Crane stood and faced them. Listen to me, all of you. We did nothing wrong. We followed our duty. We documented everything. The evidence will prove we're telling the truth. What if it doesn't? May's voice was quiet. What if they bury the evidence? What if they court-martial us anyway because it's easier than admitting we were right? Crane had no answer, because deep down he knew Mays was right. They had walked into something bigger than themselves, and sometimes the truth wasn't enough to save you. Outside, the base continued its evening routine. Inside the holding barracks, 6 men sat in the growing darkness, waiting for a verdict they couldn't control. And somewhere in a locked room, Colonel Briggs and Major Houseman stared at the evidence spread across a table, trying to decide which story would cause less damage. The story of German infiltration, or the story of 6 soldiers who had stumbled into something they were never meant to find. 3 days passed in the holding barracks. 3 days of silence broken only by the delivery of meals and the changing of guards. No one told them what was happening. No one answered their questions. They existed in a limbo of waiting, their fate being decided behind closed doors by men they would never see. On the morning of the 4th day, the door opened. Colonel Briggs stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. He looked at each of them in turn, then focused on Crane. Sergeant, come with me. The rest of you, stay here. Crane stood and followed Briggs out into the cold November morning. They walked across the base in silence, past warehouses and administrative buildings, until they reached a structure Crane hadn't seen before. A laboratory. White walls. Clean floors. The smell of chemicals sharp in the air. Inside, a man in a white coat stood beside a table covered with glass vials, test tubes, and documentation. He was older, maybe 60, with grey hair and tired eyes. Briggs gestured to him. "Sergeant Crane, this is Dr. Milton Graves. He's a toxicologist from Fort Detrick. He's been examining the cargo from the Monterey Belle." Dr. Graves looked up from his notes, his expression grave. "Sergeant, I understand you were the first to board that ship." "Yes, sir. Then you saved lives." Graves set down his clipboard. "The substance in those crates isn't medicine. It's a weaponized biological agent, a modified strain of botulinum toxin combined with a chemical accelerant. Exposure causes rapid onset symptoms, fever, hemorrhaging, organ failure. Death within 48 hours. Whoever created this knew exactly what they were doing." Crane felt his chest tighten. The crew never had a chance. Graves picked up one of the vials, holding it up to the light. The moment those crates were opened, the toxin became airborne. In the confined space of a cargo hold, everyone aboard was exposed. They were dead men walking from that moment on. "How many doses were in the cargo?" Briggs asked. Graves consulted his notes. Based on the manifest and the number of crates, approximately 2,000 vials. Each vial contained enough toxin to contaminate an entire field hospital. If this cargo had reached its intended destination, we could have lost thousands of men, maybe more. The weight of those words settled over the room. Crane thought of the captain's journal, the desperate attempt to scuttle the ship, the final act of a man who understood what was at stake. "Colonel," Crane said quietly, "the German documents we found are authentic," Briggs interrupted. "We've had them analyzed. The signatures match known German intelligence officers. The orders are real. Everything you reported checks out." Crane felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, vindication, but also anger, because for 3 days they had been treated like criminals instead of soldiers who had done their duty. "Then why the interrogation, sir? Why treat us like suspects?" Briggs met his eyes, and for the first time, Crane saw something resembling respect there. "Because we had to be sure. A discovery like this, it has implications beyond what you can imagine. If word gets out that the Germans managed to infiltrate our medical supply chain, it creates panic. It undermines trust. We needed to verify every detail before we could move forward. And now that you have." "Now," Briggs said, his voice firm, "you and your men are being commended. Your actions prevented a catastrophe. You followed your instincts, you documented everything properly, and you brought back evidence that's going to help us shut down an entire enemy sabotage network." Crane stared at him, commended. Graves spoke up, his tone almost apologetic. "Sergeant, the chemical composition of this toxin matches samples we've intercepted from 2 other sabotage attempts in the past 6 months, one in California, one in New York. We've been hunting this network for a year. Thanks to the documents you recovered, we now know who's running it. We have names, we have connections. You broke this case open." Crane didn't know what to say. For days he had prepared himself for a court-martial, for blame, for the weight of injustice that came with being in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong skin color. He hadn't prepared for this, for acknowledgement, for the truth to actually matter. "There's something else," Briggs said. He pulled a folder from under his arm and opened it. "The saboteur you found in the engine room, we identified him through the photograph in his wallet. His name was Klaus Richter, German national. Entered the country in 1938 on a student visa. He's been operating under deep cover for 6 years. The telegram you found in his hand, it came from a contact in New York. We've arrested him. 3 others as well. The network is dismantled." "What about the families?" Crane asked suddenly. "The crew of the Monterey Belle, what are they being told?" Briggs closed the folder. That the ship suffered a catastrophic engine failure and sank with all hands. The bodies have been buried with full honors. The families will receive pensions and benefits. As far as the official record is concerned, there was no sabotage. There was no poison. There was only a tragedy at sea. Crane's jaw tightened. "So we bury the truth. We protect morale," Briggs corrected. "If this story goes public, it creates fear. It makes people question whether their medicine is safe, whether their food is poisoned, whether the enemy is everywhere. That's what the Germans want. We're not giving it to them. And what about my men? What do they get? You'll all be reassigned, Briggs said. Promoted. Corporal Mays is being made sergeant, the others are moving up a rank as well. You're being transferred to a new unit, one that handles sensitive operations. Your record will show exemplary service and commendation for actions above and beyond the call of duty. Crane understood what wasn't being said. They were being rewarded, but also silenced, promoted and moved away from anyone who might ask questions, given just enough recognition to keep them quiet, but not so much that the story would spread. It was a bargain, a deal that left the truth buried, but the men standing. He thought about refusing, about demanding public recognition, about fighting for the crew of the Monterey Bell to be honored properly. But he was tired, and he knew how the world worked. Sometimes survival was the only victory you could claim. What happens to the ship? He asked. It's being towed out to deep water and scuttled. Dr. Graves will supervise the disposal of the cargo. Every vial will be destroyed. The ship will be erased from the official registry. By the end of the week, it will be like the Monterey Bell never existed. Crane nodded slowly. And if I refuse? If I tell people what really happened? Briggs' expression hardened. Then you'll be dishonorably discharged for violating classified operational security. Your men will be tried for the same. And everything you accomplished, every life you saved will be erased. Is that what you want? The threat was clear. Cooperate or lose everything. Crane felt the anger rise in his throat, but he forced it down. He thought of Mays, Jackson, Reed, and the others. Good men who had followed him into danger and come out the other side. Men who deserved better than to be sacrificed for his principles. I'll keep quiet, Crane said finally. We all will. Good. Briggs extended his hand. For what it's worth, Sergeant, you did the right thing. What you found out there, it matters, even if no one ever knows about it. Crane shook his hand, but the gesture felt hollow. He walked out of the laboratory and back across the base, the weight of the secret settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. When he reached the holding barracks, his men looked up expectantly. He told them everything. The toxin, the sabotage network, the commendations, the silence. Mays was the first to speak. So we save thousands of lives and we get promoted and told to shut up about it. That's the deal, Crane said. Jackson laughed bitterly. Of course it is. Can't have black soldiers being heroes. Might upset the order of things. Reed shook his head. At least we're not being court-martialed, at least we're alive. They sat in silence for a while, each man processing what it meant. They had done everything right. They had followed their duty, risked their lives, uncovered a conspiracy, and their reward was to be moved quietly into the shadows and told to forget. But Crane knew they wouldn't forget. None of them would. The smell of that ship, the sight of those bodies, the weight of the documents in his coat, it would stay with them forever. Not as a story they could tell, but as a truth they carried alone. The next morning, they were released. New orders came through. Mays was heading to a supply depot in Virginia. Jackson and Reed to a motor pool in North Carolina, the others to different postings scattered across the South. They would never serve together again. That, too, was part of the deal. Scatter them, separate them, make sure the story stayed fragmented and forgotten. Before they left, Crane gathered them one last time in the barracks. He didn't have a speech prepared. He didn't know what to say, so he just spoke from the gut. What we found out there, what we did, it matters. Even if no one knows, even if we can't tell anyone, we know. And that has to be enough. Mays nodded. It's enough, Sarge. They shook hands, one by one. Then they packed their duffel bags and walked out into the cold Georgia morning, each man heading to a different future, carrying a secret that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Crane's new assignment took him to Maryland, to a small logistics unit that handled classified shipments. The work was boring, administrative, nothing like the intensity of that November morning on the Monterey Bell. But sometimes, late at night, he would pull out the notebook where he had written down the coordinates, the notes, the details of everything they had found. He kept it hidden, wrapped in oilcloth, buried at the bottom of his footlocker, a record, a testament, proof that it had happened. Years later, After the war ended and he returned to civilian life, Crane occasionally saw news stories about medical breakthroughs, about antibiotics and treatments that saved countless soldiers. He wondered how many of those men owed their lives to a decision made on a foggy November morning by 6 soldiers who would never be named. He never spoke about the Monterey Bell. Not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. The official story was that he had served in harbor patrol and then logistics. Routine duty, nothing special. He carried the secret to his grave, as did Mays, Jackson, Reed, and the others. But the truth remained. Hidden in classified files, locked away in government archives, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and national security, the story of 6 men who found a ship drifting at sea, who uncovered a conspiracy, who saved thousands of lives, and who were rewarded with silence. In 1947, 3 years after the incident, a small article appeared in the back pages of a Georgia newspaper. It mentioned that several cargo ships had mysteriously sunk off the East Coast during the war, likely due to engine failures or storms. The Monterey Bell was listed among them. 9 crew members lost, no survivors. A tragic footnote to a war full of tragedies. No one reading that article would ever know the truth. That those 9 men had died not from engine failure, but from poison. That a German agent had infiltrated American supply lines. That a squad of black soldiers had stopped a catastrophe. That heroism sometimes came without recognition, and that the price of doing the right thing was often silence. But somewhere in a locked vault in Washington, the documents remained. The captain's journal, the saboteur's logbook, the German orders, the photographs Reed had taken, the telegram clutched in a dead man's hand. Evidence that one day, perhaps decades later, historians would uncover and wonder about. Evidence that would eventually tell the story that Crane and his men were forbidden to speak. Until then, the truth waited. Patient. Inevitable. Knowing that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always find their way to the surface. And on cold November mornings, when the fog rolls in thick off the Georgia coast, there are those who say you can still see the ghost of a cargo ship drifting in the distance, carrying its secrets through the grey dawn. A reminder that some stories refuse to stay silent forever.